handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman, Seat, over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder, Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2 1. Grid to Marc, Mike Charlie, 4 7 tree 9er, 8 9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Marc, smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEPT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience. Very happy that you could be with us. You know, my favorite law firm out there, Pacific Legal Foundation, has been pretty busy. And we've discussed a lot of cases with Pacific Legal. And I'm delighted to have Wen Fa with us because he's going to tell us about a huge achievement that Pacific Legal and decision that was made by the Supreme Court. And I'm so happy to be able to follow up on this one. So, Wen, thanks for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience.
Denise, thanks for having me on.
Congratulations to Pacific Legal. This particular case, ladies and gentlemen, dealt with, I think I'm going to break it down when you're going to have to help me with this one, but what you could wear to in your attire when you go to vote and what you can't wear. And this was brought by a single fella, not by really an organization, but just a single man who wanted to go vote in Minnesota, correct?
Right. Well, it was individuals and an organization. But what happened here was Andy Seelig, who's the lead plaintiff, just went to vote wearing a Tea Party T-shirt in 2010, and he was stopped from voting twice, and his name and address was taken down for prosecution just because he had a T-shirt that said "Don't tread on me," the picture of the Gadsden flag. So the Supreme Court in February heard argument in our First Amendment challenge to that Minnesota law that prohibits voters from wearing any political apparel featuring an organization with, quote, recognizable political views. And on Thursday, the Supreme Court struck down the Minnesota law because it said that law was so broad and so susceptible to discriminatory enforcement that it cannot comport with the First Amendment's guarantee of free speech.
The decision was written by Justice Alito, right?
No, it was actually written by Chief Justice Roberts.
Roberts.
Right.
Sorry.
Justice Alito did have a very colorful exchange with the government's attorney at oral argument in which Justice Alito asked, well, if someone wore a T-shirt featuring a logo of or the text of the Second Amendment, would that be banned? And the government's attorney said, yes, that would be banned. And Justice Alito said, what about the First Amendment? And the government's attorney said, no, that wouldn't be banned. So the government's attorney was literally picking between two constitutional rights. You can wear the shirt with the text of one to the polling place, but not the other. And if you listen to the audio posted on our website at pacificlegal.org, you can actually even hear Justice Thomas chuckling as this exchange was happening. So very colorful exchange, and actually made its way to the opinion.
I love it. I saw a video. Didn't you guys do some kind of a cute little cartoon video on Facebook?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was talking about. Basically, the government's attorney was unable to draw a line between what could be allowed into the polling place and what had to be left outside of the polling place. And if the government's own attorney couldn't do it, how do you expect, scores of poll workers across the state to be enforcing this in a viewpoint neutral way? And the answer is they can't. This invites viewpoint discrimination against conservatives and liberals, and that's one of the many reasons that this is unconstitutional under the First Amendment.
Wasn't the vote 7-2 one?
Yes, it was 7-2, but I think it's fair to say that on the merits, it probably was more like 9-0 because the dissenting justices didn't raise any serious objection with the merits of the decision. They just wanted it to be sent to the Minnesota State Supreme Court for it to interpret the statute in a way that might not raise constitutional problems. But as the majority pointed out, even under the state's interpretation of the law, it would still raise constitutional problems. And in the meanwhile, while all of this sending back to the state Supreme Court was happening, many more voters in Minnesota would be losing their First Amendment rights. And that's why the majority came out with the decision it did, invalidating this law on First Amendment grounds.
Now, when the plaintiff, he didn't want any kind of monetary fix to this, or he wasn't jumping up and down and blah blah blah. He just wanted the law changed, right?
Exactly. He didn't seek any monetary damages. All he wanted was to get the court to stop Minnesota from enforcing this discriminatory and arbitrary law, and that's exactly what the Supreme Court did. It required Minnesota to go back to the drawing board and draft something that was more tailored to actually legitimate government interests, instead of promulgating a haphazard regulation that could prohibit people, as the court noted, from wearing shirts that say ACLU, AARP, or even Ben and Jerry's, because Ben and Jerry's has had stances on political issues.
What did the plaintiff have to say? That he was pretty happy about all this?
Yeah, he was absolutely, over the moon at the court's decision. He's been fighting his case for 8 years.
8 years.
Yeah, 8 years. And not only that, multiple courts, both the district court and the Court of Appeals, has ruled against him. He suffered 5 losses. He's lost over and over again, and he finally won, at the most important court in the United States, the Supreme Court of the United States. So he couldn't be happier.
Remarkable. And so how long had you been representing him? It wasn't all 8 years, correct?
No, we actually took this case up on the cert petition. Pacific Legal Foundation has an excellent record before the Supreme Court. Now, with 10 wins in our last 11 cases, we represent clients free of charge in courts nationwide to vindicate their constitutional rights. So when I saw a case like this, I thought it was outrageous. Even though the plaintiff, Andy Seelig, lost all 5 times in the different courts, I thought this was outrageous. And if the Supreme Court could take this case, there's no way that they would not hold this law to be, there was no way that they would not invalidate the law. And the Supreme Court ended up taking the case, and they ended up striking down the law.
Now, as I recall on this case, there are 6 other states that have laws that are almost exactly the same. So I don't want to say that wrong, so you'll need to correct me.
Right. So sorry, go ahead.
And it would affect them too, that they would necessarily have to change theirs?
Right. So there's a little bit of a minor debate about this between the parties during litigation. There are about 9 or 10 states. The difference isn't huge that also prohibit political apparel. I think Florida might have something similar. I know states like Texas and California, as the Chief Justice pointed out in the majority opinion, have laws that are similar. And the court said, we're not discussing the whether those laws are constitutional or not, but they are susceptible to a future challenge, and that's exactly what I think you will see happening in the coming months or whenever, is more challenges to these laws. We're always willing to take the right clients whose constitutional rights to be vindicated and represent them in court to vindicate their constitutional rights.
When you argue before the Supreme Court, are you given like a time limit on this? Do they just say, okay, you've got 40 minutes and we'll make the decision later? How does that work? What does that look like?
Right. So I actually didn't argue this case before the Supreme Court. They do give you a 30-minute time limit.
Ladies and gentlemen, Wen Fa's the best lawyer over there at Pacific Legal. He reminded me of that, but go ahead, Wen.
So, yes, there's a 30-minute time limit on the argument. And then the court basically decides the case that Friday, or takes an initial vote on the case on Friday, and then it could release the opinion anytime between then and the end of June. And it usually releases opinions each Monday, but it doesn't tell you which ones it would announce. So over the past 2 months or so, I've just been kind of, because California, the opinions are released 10 a.m. Eastern, so 7 a.m. Pacific time. So I've been kind of just getting to the office at 6:30 and waiting for opinions to come out every Monday for the last 2 months. But, hey, it was all worth it because at the end of the day, we won, and we won a monumental decision for First Amendment rights.
How are you notified of that? Do they send an email, or, is it just announced on the Supreme Court website, or what?
It ends up being announced on the Supreme Court website, but the fastest way of knowing is really just checking Twitter. So I found out, the same way as many other Americans, or many Americans found out.
Wow. So we've got the Supreme Court in the Twitter world. Okay. Who was was it a Solicitor General on the government side?
No, it was actually the county's attorney, Dan Rogan, who, he seemed like a nice enough person for my limited interactions with him. But, that oral argument exchange with Justice Alito, I think if the justices had any doubt about which way they were going to rule before that argument, I think all of their doubts were erased when the government's attorney said that someone couldn't wear a T-shirt with the text of the Second Amendment into the polling place. I think that just highlighted the potential for arbitrary and discriminatory enforcement with this broad law.
He didn't sound like he was really convinced himself, was he?
Yeah, honestly, if I had to defend a law like that, I don't think I would be either.
Wow. So do you expect some of these other states to tap on Pacific Legal's shoulder and ask for some assistance in rewriting their respective laws, or do you expect some other cases that are similar to kind of, seek your help?
Yeah, I certainly think both things will happen. Ideally, some of these states will change their laws in order to comport with the First Amendment guarantee of free speech. But if they don't, we're always willing and able to represent sympathetic clients who've had their First Amendment rights taken away from them, who are, who want to wear something as simple as a T-shirt or a button on Election Day when they go to vote.
Or a red ribbon in their hair, or, yeah, exactly.
Right, and exercise their right to free speech, but can't because the state has a law similar to Minnesota's. I think we're definitely open to the possibility of future challenges down the road to vindicate more Americans' First Amendment rights, just as we've vindicated the First Amendment rights of Minnesota voters.
When it comes to First Amendment rights and this particular decision, will this have any kind of influence perhaps on any of the other cases that are First Amendment cases before the court, or no? Will they just keep them really distinctive?
Not this term, I think, but, this is a big opinion that can have implications beyond the polling place.
Yeah, that's my thought.
College campuses, there are all sorts of restrictive speech codes and speech codes that really give the universities broad discretion in who they want to punish and who they don't want to punish. So I think a case like this could really be used not just in polling places, but also on college campuses across the United States.
Does that include, like, with having speakers come speak, you think?
I do think that. I think a lot of universities apply those sort of rules in discriminatory ways so that they'll, for example, some universities have been known to invite liberal speakers, but whenever a conservative speaker want to come, they'll either sort of withdraw their invitation after the fact, or have organized events to shout these speakers down, or charge conservative speakers in some cases higher fees than speakers with differing views. And that's not what America's about. America's about having different sorts of views: liberal, conservative, libertarian, what have you. Different views debate in sorts of the public arena, the public square. I think that's what the First Amendment is about.
Yeah, because I mean, we keep hearing these talking heads. They say we want to at least begin to have the discussion. It's time to have these discussions, and yet you've got all of these venues that refuse to have these discussions, that refuse to have these debates, and wearing a T-shirt, whatever it may say, kind of spills over into several other approaches and attitudes. So I'm guessing that it could necessarily put some of these college campuses on notice, you think?
I definitely think so. The old adage goes that the proper response to disagreeable speech isn't censorship. It is rather more speech, and that's what I think should be happening at these college campuses. People, if I'm a conservative who disagrees with liberal views or vice versa, I shouldn't want to stifle the person's speech. I should, come host my own event and respond to views that I find disagreeable. And that's what I've been trying to do with this case. For example, when I'm speaking at different events, I always especially appreciate the student chapters that provide a voice on the other side to counter my arguments. I think that really highlights the disagreements for, not just our benefit, but also the benefit of the students. But sadly, in this day and age, you don't see that in some college campuses, not because it's the student's choice or the speaker's choice, but rather it's the university administration kind of taking a new view to censorship. And I think this opinion will really push back against that.
Circling back to Minnesota, have they, it's obviously gone back to Minnesota. Are they given some kind of a time frame for their legislature to rewrite this law or repeal it, or what? Do we know?
Right. So the law is now invalid because Minnesota has an election in November, like many other states. I think they will come out with something that is at least a temporary measure to tell people what's allowed or what's not allowed at the polling place. But for now this political apparel ban is off the books in Minnesota, or unenforceable in Minnesota, because of this Supreme Court decision.
Does this have any effect on signage, where people put signs in their yards and they too get necessarily forbidden and all that? I mean, I have this sense that this has got some farther implications, good implications, I might add, consequences, than we necessarily are judging. Did I get that wrong?
No, I think you got it absolutely right. And I think it will have an impact on signage, because some states, unlike Minnesota, some states have what's called a buffer zone around the polling place, in which you can't put anything. You can't, exercise your right to political speech. And that's especially troubling in the example that you just mentioned. If I have a house that's within 100 or 200 yards, outside of a polling place, I can't even put a sign there on my own private property on who I want to support in the election. And that's not just a restriction on your free speech rights. That's also a restriction on your property rights. And I think someone like that would also be an ideal person to seek the next challenge to the Supreme Court of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, you could have a bumper sticker or some kind of a little, thing in your car. And if you want to go drive up and down in front of the polling place, you can't even do that because you've got something on your car, right?
Right. I think that's absolutely right. And not just at the polling place, but also in an area around the polling place. If you just happen to be driving down the street, that by the letter of the law in some of these states could be prohibited, and you could be charged with a violation of the state law on this matter just for driving your car around on the street, just because the street happens to be within this buffer zone of the polling place.
Are all cases that go before the Supreme Court given about a 30-minute window to argue?
a 3-minute, a 30 minute?
30 minutes.
Yes, 30 minutes per side. Some cases actually get a little bit longer, but most cases get about 30 minutes per side.
You really have to, as a lawyer, on both sides, you really have to have your arguments there, don't you? I mean, you got to be like so prepared that it's you kind of make it a slam dunk. I mean, there's like really almost no room for debate. I mean, you've got to have, all of your ducks in a row, right?
Yeah, you have 9 of the smartest legal minds in the country in the Supreme Court justices. And, I think that if you're not prepared or if you don't believe in your argument, the justices will sort of ask questions that, pick your argument apart. And I think that's exactly what happened with Justice Alito's examples. Some other examples, Justice Kagan said, what about resist or me too? I mean, I think those are very hard hypotheticals, especially for someone like the state with the weaker argument in the case.
Is this a situation? I know other cases before the Supreme Court. There's limited seating, but then there's some kind of a lawyer, a holding pen off to the side. For cases like these, is the courtroom packed?
Yes, the courtroom is packed. In every argument I've been in, the courtroom has been packed. You have lawyers, spectators, people who are gaining admissions to the Supreme Court bar, and you also have reporters on the side. These are all big public events. The Supreme Court hears so few cases every year. You can expect every argument to have a lot of spectators and a lot of people who want to get in and couldn't get into some arguments. That's what happened to me during one argument. I tried to go in as a spectator and waited in line 3 hours before the argument started in the lawyer's line, but was unable to actually make it. And I made the overflow room, which is basically another room in the Supreme Court building itself where they pipe the audio in, but you can't really see anything.
So do you lawyers, you just kind of sit around and go, well, are you critiquing what is happening in the courtroom?
Yeah, I try to be.
Spill it out. Spill it to us.
Yeah. I think there is definitely some of that going on in the court, in the overflow room.
It would be fun just to pipe in what you guys are all saying in that little, second tier bullpen. It's kind of like when you hear some of these news reports. I always want to have a lawyer sitting next to me going, something's really wrong with this, and then have you guys say, well, this is what they're not saying. This is really what it ought to be doing. So, right. We get caught up with just the headlines and these kinds of things, and we don't know all the background or the context or the circumstance or the whole landscape of it all. But WNFA, ladies and gentlemen, at the Pacific Legal Foundation, pacificlegal.org, just congratulations. I'm very, very happy with this, and I can see that it's certainly going to have some other consequences that are wide-ranging, as Wen has described. So well done, and maybe we ought to go out and see if we can get some more Don't Tread on Me t-shirts or bumper stickers and drive them up and down and see if we're challenged, right?
Absolutely. We're happy to vindicate the First Amendment rights of all voters, no matter what they want to be wearing to the polling place.
Well, great job, and Wen, thanks for being with us and explaining it all to us, and great job on the win.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, more coming your way, so stay with us.
We're about to join Don Newen, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio, and Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience, for a weekly situation report, or SITREP. 18 hours a day, Denise Simon lives her life as an intel analyst. 18 hours a day, Don Newen lives his life in the world of rock and roll. 1 hour each day, Newen receives a daily SITREP from Simon. Welcome to the Drive Time Situation Report. Fasten your seatbelt. You're now in Don Newen's car, and he is calling in for his sit rep.
Check the Talk America Radio schedules for showtimes at talkamericaradio.us.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio. For 28 years, I was in the mainstream media, most recently as an anchor at the Fox News Channel. No more. Ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has completely failed the American people. Radio networks like Talk America Radio will not fail you. Radio shows like Cowboy Logic Radio will not fail you. Check out the entire roster of over 60 weekly radio shows by visiting talkamericaradio.us. That's talkamericaradio.us.
TalkAmericaRadio.us.
Ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. I got the real honor of having Ericka Anderson with us. She's actually published a book, and it's couldn't be more timely, I might add. But it's also a book of a topic of which was very, very personal to her. The title of the book is Leaving Cloud 9, which you can find on Amazon and pre-order because it's on its way out unless it's already hit the bookshelves, but I'm not convinced it has. Ericka Anderson, welcome to the Denise Simon Experience.
Thank you for having me so much.
So your book is on Amazon. Is it still in a pre-order mode?
It's still on pre-order mode until Tuesday, June 26th. So coming up, and of course we want to get as many pre-orders as we can.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Ericka Anderson actually, she's got quite the resume too, because she's a former digital director for National Review. She's been over at the Heritage Foundation, and she worked for Vice President Mike Pence in communications. And so she's also, with all of this, has a very personal story that is talked about in Leaving Cloud 9. So Ericka, what is the real spirit of the book, Leaving Cloud 9?
Well, ultimately, it is a redemption story. It chronicles the life of my husband from the time he was born to present day. But over the course of those many years, you know, he went through on the extreme end of childhood trauma as a kid, growing up with a mom who was an extreme alcoholic, dysfunctional alcoholic at that, who became a drug addict, and he just went through all kinds of abuse and neglect as a child. And as a result of that, his adulthood was very rough, and he had a lot to overcome. And so we tell that story of where he came from and what he went through and how he got through it and came out on the other side. And we just hope that it can be kind of a message of hope or an example for other people who are suffering from the consequences of similar types of things.
Ericka, I think, we don't understand the volume of our population that has a similar story or almost an exact story as Rick's, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, he did probably experience more than, the average person would have in this kind of situation, but there are so many different aspects of it that do touch on the lives of so many people in this country, especially in light of the opioid crisis. There's millions of kids out there. I actually don't know the numbers. I probably shouldn't say millions, but many, to put it clearly, that are experiencing neglect and abuse because their parents are on drugs. And then not to mention how many people are, now adults and reeling from the consequences of that, which, is driving up the suicide rate and rates of mental illness with depression. And like my husband, he suffered from bipolar disorder. So there's just a lot of this ingrained in society right now.
Yeah, the number 60,000 rings true with me of those that died just last year due to the overdosing on opioids. Now, that's an epidemic. That into itself is an epidemic. And what's fascinating, Ericka, is that nobody really decided to have a discussion about opioids until the Department of Justice and the Trump administration sort of started ringing the bell on it, right?
Yeah, it seems like it just kind of, began being a big news story. I don't even know, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. I mean, I could be off on that, but it wasn't too long ago. And by that time, we've already had the death rate spiking. And, unfortunately, it's too late for some people, but I'm thankful that the Trump administration and, other parts of government are taking it seriously, and they are implementing programs to help. That is one big part of how we deal with this crisis. Although I think there are multiple ways that we deal with it, including, individuals, local communities, organizations. I mean, I think it takes a full-scale effort to combat the crisis that we have going on right now.
Ericka, is this a poverty problem? Is this a education problem? Is this a drug problem? Or is it a combination of all of those?
Well, I think certainly all of those things can play into it. I think poverty is a big part of it, partially just because a lot of times when people are turning to drugs, number one, they're in a cycle of poverty that is from their families handed down generation to generation. But number two, people that are, experiencing job loss or don't have jobs, or they're living in communities that are kind of run down and the economy is bad. That's a time in life when you don't really feel like you have much of a purpose, and not having a purpose, not having a lot of support around you. A lot of these places that are dealing with the crisis, the faith communities are leaving. Religious life is basically being cut down. People are not attending church. Churches are shutting down in some of these areas. And all of that contributes to this sort of somewhat meaningless life for people, that they just want to numb out the pain. And then, of course, if you're caught up in this cycle from kind of handed down through your family, it's really hard to break out of that and be the one that moves away or is able to break out of it. So, there's a lot of contributing factors.
And in the case of your husband, and there are others like your husband that became exceptional, and when it should be kind of the norm, that people are able to, seek the remedies, whether it is getting, the Lord into their life, or seeking other kind of educational help, or, drug abuse help. There's just not enough success stories, are there?
No, there's definitely not enough success stories. I mean, and of course, that's why we want to tell this story, so that we can show people, hey, here's an example of a guy who really did break the cycle and get out of it. And there's no formula or specific formula for someone to say, hey, if I take, but you can look at his life and see some of the things that did help him. And a lot of kids that are living in poverty and under this drug addiction don't have a lot of role models. They don't have a lot of mentors. They're living in the lower class, and the opportunities for them are very small. And so a couple of the things that, or at least one thing that helped my husband in his life, was he had one guy, a boyfriend of his mom's, who was kind of a role model to him, somebody who just cared about him, basically one of the only people who cared for him as a child. One kid's life can really make all the difference. Not necessarily going to happen every time, but it's certainly important. And I think that should be an encouragement to people who have the capacity and ability to kind of reach out and try to be there for kids, maybe in your community, or reaching out, maybe across the city where you live if they don't live nearby you, and see how you can help. Because honestly, you can't overestimate the power of a mentor.
Ericka,
so that was one of the things. Mm-hmm.
How did you meet your husband?
We met online. We were online dating.
All right. And was that a kind of an adventure? And was his did he reveal his history such that it may have made you just a little standoffish at some point?
Yeah, well, I didn't know any of the, behind the computer screen, but of course, when we met in person pretty quickly, he started to tell me a lot of these difficult stories from his past, which I kind of found shocking. I'm someone that came from a really good background. I'm middle class. I have a wonderful family and extended family. It was really hard to hear some of these stories, especially as I grew to get to know him more, and, we were kind of falling in love and all of these things. And it was hard because he was divorced, and that's not something I ever saw for myself as someone who was in my 20s. But, his childhood and these things that he went through led to a lot of relationship problems for him. So we did have a lot to work through when we first met, coming from such different backgrounds and thinking about the world in such different ways. But we really feel that our relationship was orchestrated by God, and we can see how he has really worked within both of us to kind of, learn and love the things about each other that are our weaknesses. And we've certainly seen that in his story as he's kind of healed and overcome over the past 8 years.
So in essence, your story is collective. I mean, you kind of achieved a success together in all of this. I mean, it wasn't just his achievement, it became yours as well, right?
I mean, I wouldn't want to take credit, but I think that part of his healing journey and part of this whole plan that was orchestrated in his life by God was meeting me. And part of his healing began when we met, because he was able to be introduced to family in a way that he had never known, for one. I mean, and that's huge, I think, for people that have gone through some of this stuff, who really never had family to rely on, or didn't understand what family was supposed to look like. He really was able to see that through my family. And then, of course, when he decided to pursue faith in God and start a personal relationship with God, that was key. And, he had started down that path just before he met me. It was kind of just like a little tiny seed, but it certainly grew majorly after we started dating and he started going to church with me. And, it was always a huge part of my life. And so, yes, I would say, the majority of his real inner healing and spiritual healing took place after we met.
Who needs to read your book, Ericka?
Oh, gosh. There are so many different types of people that can read this book, because we cover everything from, of course, people that are dealing with childhood trauma and overcoming that, but it's also for people that simply may be dealing with a mental illness like depression, or we talk a lot about, my husband has bipolar disorder, so we talk about that and kind of understanding if you don't have it, if you have a friend, a spouse, or a family member that has a mental illness. There's a lot to that side of life that people don't understand, and it really will give, the book, I think, will give you a sense of compassion and empathy for someone who's dealing with the repercussions of some of these things. And then just, outside of that, anyone who likes a good redemption story and a story of hope, because, you know, you really see how the miracle took place in his life through prayer, and kind of you see his heart transforming over time. And it's pretty incredible to watch. And some of the stories that I tell in there are just so clearly ordained by God, that it's you know, you kind of have to read it to believe it and know that it's true. But in the end, you know, it's hard to read. Some of the stuff that happened to him is hard to read, but you just know that you're cruising toward a happy ending and a happy family. And I think it could really help some people.
In looking back for your husband, was he able to identify some kind of pivot points on where things, well, maybe pivot points not the right word, maybe just points on where things kind of failed through his life? I mean, were it teachers that didn't kind of recognize some of this and offer some assistance, or, you know, some friends or neighbors or community? I mean, what were some of the,
well,
I think
he really felt like kids, probably in this country now, I think he really felt, you know, I would always say, was there anyone that you can think of? I would ask him this question, a teacher or someone, and he could come up with no one outside of the one man, his mom. He could come up with no one that had ever really reached out to him, that, you know, kind of, you know, wanted to take him under their wing. And so, you know, he didn't have a father. So it was like all of these systems were failing him. You know, his teachers, his parents, his community, you know, he never had any outreach from a church. And so it's a really sad story, but a good reminder to people in their day. And we really need to be watching out for them. And we really need to find ways to make sure they're not falling through the cracks, because it could be really detrimental and really devastating to the rest of their lives if no one, you know, ever catches them.
I would say that, you know, nobody is really equipped for these kinds of and the volume of these kind of conditions. I think maybe on a small basis, you know, whatever that number might be, there may be some good advocacy groups in this regard, but I don't think we understand the sheer volume of all of this, do we?
No, and you know, you're right. You can't count the kids out and assign one to a responsible adult. You know, it's much more complicated than that. But I'm hoping that, you know, this book and then other education campaigns, and as people hear the statistics about the number of picking up kids in foster care because of the crisis, that people are just, this awareness is going to make a difference, because there are places out there that you can help kids in these situations. Like a great example is Big Brothers Big Sisters, that mentorship program. That's something that I've been involved with, and you know, it does require people kind of inconvenience themselves and say, how can I help and what can I do? It's both the federal government and the local government and the individuals and the church. There's just so many parts to this, but I'm just hoping that people are just becoming more aware and able to step up if they can right now.
Is Rick an only child? I mean, were there siblings that were kind of going along with this?
No, he has a sister. They are very close, and you'll read about her in the book. They call each other battle buddies. They feel like they went through a war together, and you know, that's pretty much what it was for them. So because of that, they remained close, and they both would say that really took having one another there to get through what they went through. And so that was another kind of support that he had as a kid, one of the few supports that he had.
Where are Rick's parents now?
Well, he never had any relationship with his father, so he's always been out of the picture. But his mom is still living in Arizona, where he grew up, and she's still the same kind of problems that she had back then, unfortunately. Just things never really improved for her, and it's truly sad. I mean, we actually do continue to in our prayers, but it's kind of a sad situation.
It is
and
a sad
talk. They don't have a relationship anymore.
What a shame.
Yeah.
where did you come up with this title, Leaving Cloud 9?
Yeah, so he lived in a trailer park called Cloud 9, which was, that's such a ironic play on words when you think about what he went through while he lived in that trailer park. So we thought, let's take that, let's use it, because, here he is now really living on Cloud 9 with this beautiful family and having healed from the past. And it just, once we thought that title up, we just thought it just clicked. So we kept it.
How difficult, Ericka, was it to write this book? I mean, it was kind of like reliving some things, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it was far more difficult for him than it was for me, having to go back and just be in that place again, because we spent hours and hours and hours on, recording interviews as I documented every, moment basically that he could remember of his childhood. And it was hard for him. I think it really got him some days, but I also think it was part of the healing process, because we started the book and the interviews when he was kind of in the midst of getting to the point that he is now, when he was really getting to know God and really transforming his life through prayer and church. And so we started when he was way back in the beginning of that. And then by the time, here we are in 2018, and he's in a much better place. And all of that, I think, contributed to him kind of processing what happened and figuring out what he needed to do in order to get some freedom from it. So in all, I think it was good, even though it was hard.
Well, it's kind of like, you have to admit the demons, and then you have to face them, and then you have to challenge them, right?
Right, exactly. And he did all of that. There are stories in this book that, it showcases some negative aspects of him, and he was willing to do that. But I think, being willing to do that and put it out there was part of the whole process for him.
I suspect that that when your book hits the bookshelves, you need to hit some of these bookstores yourselves, because I imagine some very interesting people will want to hear that have been affected by very much the same conditions when it comes to anxiety and chaos and neglect and bipolar and narcotics and all these kinds of things. I have a sense that would be your audience. Would you think so?
Yeah, definitely. I think people, when they, the subtitle's pretty long, but it's, the true story of a life resurrected from the ashes of poverty, trauma, and mental illness. And I mean, there's so many things encapsulated within that. I think specifically people that grew up the children of alcoholics and drug addicts are really going to relate to this. There are just so many things that are similar, that kids that have alcoholic parents go through. In my research for the book, books about kids of alcoholics, and just so many of the stories that he told me lined up exactly with the research in this book. And so I think people are going to find some solace in knowing that there are other people who get it, and especially if they're still reeling from the consequences of that themselves. Hopefully they'll see, this guy also hit rock bottom and went through the same kinds of things that I did, but here's how he got out. And maybe they can use that as a kind of a pathway.
Well, I would say if you saved one person, then, the book was all worth it. But here, Ericka, this is a situation that we've been through, I think, at least 2 generations of this condition, correct?
Yeah. So in his family, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, the generation before him, meaning obviously his mother and her age group, and then, where he is, and in some cases it can go into the 3rd generation. I mean, we're not solving this, are we?
Yeah. I mean, there was certainly alcoholism in his family, even, before his own mom. And he personally, thank goodness, did never become addicted to drugs himself. And he has certainly used drinking in an unhealthy way, but he never actually became, like the kind of alcoholic that his mother was. But yeah, there are genetic tendencies towards this kind of stuff, and you really have to kind of be on guard for it. And, I think maybe, be prayerfully considering that as you raise your own kids, and realize that, there are things that can sneak up on you, especially if it's running your family, and especially if you have patterns of mental illness or tendencies toward depression. When you have those kinds of things, you're more likely to use substances as well. So, for our family, of course, we're keeping that in mind. We don't, take our health for granted. And unfortunately, like I said, like you were saying, that the poverty, that cycle really does get passed down in families, especially in these neighborhoods that are, poor and lacking in purpose.
What a challenge for, law enforcement, for medical, for psychologists and psychiatrists, and for educators. There is such a burden to one, I guess, deal with it as best they can, even if they pass these things off to, some of these professionals. We don't have a clue of the success ratio, and as a consequence, we don't know where to best apply the efforts or the solutions, do we?
Yeah. Unfortunately, like so many things, it takes time to get the research back. It takes time to see what methodologies are working, because, when you're dealing with people that are addicted to drugs, it's not going to happen overnight. So, the best thing we can be doing is implementing these programs and trying different things in different places. And hopefully here, sooner rather than later, we can look at some of the, first, evidence of what we're trying and see, duplicate what is working, and hopefully that will spread, to larger areas of the country.
I wish you a lot of success with this book, because it's kind of like the 80-pound elephant in the room that everybody recognizes that's there, but they just kind of walk around it because nobody really knows what to do. And it's huge. So, you and your husband and this work that you're doing, and certainly this book is I would say, offering certainly a solution, but more than that, it is almost kind of an admission for other people that need to read it, correct?
Yeah, definitely. I'm covering kind of a wide range in the book. That does offer solution. It also offers people a way to recognize themselves in it. So I'm hoping that, we are able to reach across the spectrum.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we need you to trot on over to Amazon and click the pre-order button.
Yes.
Click it. Leaving Cloud 9. The true story of a life resurrected from the ashes of poverty, trauma, and mental illness. And it is also available on Kindle. Congratulations on this. And I would say that, in a month or so, 2 months from now, for good summer reading and whatnot, you're going to deserve another congratulations because of the success of the message and those that you have reached out to. You may never know all those numbers, but I guarantee you're going to cure at least one, making it all worth it. So, ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause for Ericka Anderson, and thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, more coming your way. Stay with us.
Handle the truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 Tree 5, 9er 2-1, grid to Marc, Mike Charlie, 4-7 Tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting independent situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds AGPT, gas TOT 53.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Marc Marano, woo, he's with us again, and I'm so delighted that he is. He is the author of the Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change. And, and I tell you what, the oceans are rising to the point where everything's going to be flooded probably by next Thursday, right, Marc?
That's right. Quick, hurry, we have to act. Actually, on that vein, I go through all those details. In the book, these so-called tipping points, we were given 20 years, 30 days, 90 days, hours, minutes. My favorite was Prince Charles, who gave us 100 months. And when it expired, he ended up adding on about 45 years because it wasn't ready for the deadline to hit. So, yeah, we must act now or else there's no reason to act now. So.
Well, I mean, Obama made it sound like it was worse than being hit by, an atomic weapon.
That's right. They always talk about the carbon dioxide we're putting in, or equivalent to, so many Hiroshima nuclear bombs that we don't, atomic bombs. And it turns out it's based on nonsense. They're talking about putting plant fertilizer in the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide. Humans exhale carbon dioxide. They want to declare that a pollutant, compare it to atomic weapons, and regulate the hell out of the global economy and call global governance, wealth redistribution, all to save us from the coming climate calamity, which never seems to come. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Every time there's a hurricane or tornado or flood, that's what they warned us about. That's right. So bad weather is what they warned us about. And guess what? We always have bad weather somewhere.
I'm not sure I can say this on the air. I'm not sure that I've said it on the air before, but
Yeah.
we were going to figure out a way to stop cows from farting. The whole methane gas thing, because maybe what were we going to do? We were going to create some kind of a carbon tax against ranchers who bred cattle, but we didn't say anything about horses or chickens or goats, right?
Yeah, they want to go after. We have our Meatless Mondays. You got celebrities, Paul McCartney. We actually have what's her name? Married to Tom Cruise, blonde Australian lady.
Yeah. I think she's not married anymore. Yeah, whatever her name.
Yeah, Nicole Kidman. She did a whole thing about eating insects and how yummy they are and eating them live. And, I don't know where the animal rights people were eating live insects, but they're really promoting insects, meatless stuff, the tofu, vegan, strict diet.
Still leaves the cows out there. The cows and the goats and the lambs are still out there, right?
Well, I think they want to, they probably want to end up eventually slaughtering them and killing them because of all their emissions. They claim that cow emissions are worse for climate than all the transportation sector combined, airline, planes, cars, trains, you name it, that cows are the number one evil for a whole host of reasons. A, because it feeds population expansion. All of their emissions, including, as you mentioned, their rare emissions, release methane and other stuff that causes a warming of the planet. But it's essentially how they want to re-engineer our society. They want to go after our diet, our transportation. They want to go after our appliances. They want to go after our economic system. They want to go after wealth transfer. They want to go after our system of government, global governance. It's all an excuse because of this alleged calamity. And I go back in the book and show that in the 1960s and 70s, they were worried about overpopulation. They were worried about global cooling. They were worried about resource scarcity. They were worried about Amazon rainforests in the 80s and 90s. And the solution's always the same: global governance, wealth redistribution, central power. This is how they want to solve it. So you realize that global warming is but the latest environmental scare that they've plugged into their generic solution model, which is always them in charge and central planning.
All right, Marc, here's the deal. We hear this term greenhouse gases. Now, greenhouse is a building where inside the building we have these plants and, orchids and ferns and whatever. What really truly is greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, they try to say that, first of all, carbon dioxide is the chief greenhouse gas emission, but there's others, methane and and other gases that we may or may not release. But here's the issue. Many scientists take exception with that notion that it's a greenhouse gas. The idea is that these emissions go up into the earth and then they don't allow the heat to escape out into space, and it creates sort of like a greenhouse where it gets hot, humid underneath, and that's what we're causing on Earth. The problem with that is, geologically speaking, the Earth has had no correlation with carbon dioxide and temperature. And I point this out in the book. I got a Nobel Prize-winning scientist actually on the back cover explaining this, that we've had ice ages when it's been many times higher CO2. So that's not the case. We're not creating greenhouses. Now, the question is, can carbon dioxide have a warming effect? And yes, it can. Water vapor is another greenhouse gas, so to speak. And water vapor is much more potent. So they're going to start regulating our showers and swimming pools and garden hoses? Believe me, they will.
They did in California, aren't they?
That's right. Yeah, they're trying to regulate everything. Yeah, in fact, Jerry Brown oddly proposed the solution to overpopulation. We had the Berkeley City Council last week issued a declaration calling a climate emergency and saying overpopulation was driving dangerous global warming, and we need to do something about it. Well, here's the problem. The California governor in California, Jerry Brown, has said that unchecked global warming is going to lead to the death of 3 billion people. So actually, we have something that solves itself. If unchecked population leads to global warming, and global warming leads to 3 billion deaths, which is almost half our population, we've just solved our own problem.
Bang. It's just okay. Now let me ask you this bizarre question, because we obviously keep hearing that the oceans are rising and the icebergs and the ice blah blah blah. Antarctica, it's melting. Big thousands of tons of ice is breaking off and sinking and whatnot. So the oceans are okay. And we have a water problem. And I do agree that we do have a water problem. I mean, California's got a water problem. Africa's got a water problem. Iran's got a water problem. Farmers have okay. Mark, why are we not using, and they're not all that expensive in the scheme of things, desalination machines so we can extract and purify ocean water, which would lower the levels of the seas, right? And maybe we start recreating ice.
Yes, and what you just said is exactly
I want to be
right.
wrong. Okay, all right, I'm not wrong.
Well, no, it's technology. That's the way. I mean, that's how the Israelis years ago were growing food in the desert. It's all about technology. Who would have thought? I have and I watched this from the old Johnny Carson classics. I think it was 1980. I posted it at Climate Depot. John Holdren on Johnny Carson predicting running out of oil by the end of the 1980s. Guess what? They always predict that. What saves us from that? First of all, rational thought and not ridiculous scaremongering. But second of all, technology. Who would have thought that fracking, horizontal drilling into the earth, was going to have such a huge impact and make America the energy leader of the world because of this? It is amazing. Technology saves everything. And since 1970, we've radically improved our air and water quality, while at the same time growing our population and our economy. It's not because of the heavy hand of regulation. It's because of unbelievable technologies that have come out. Coal plants being built today are radically, I think the estimate was over 90% cleaner than ones built 30, 40 years ago. It's amazing how clean and technology solves all of these problems. What you want to do is unleash technology, not the heavy hand of government, which is what the UN Paris Agreement does, which is what all these environmental EPA regulations do. Hello.
Keep going. Sorry, I don't know what happened.
I'm here. I'm here now. I think we're actually having a big extreme weather event in the Washington, D.C., lightning, thunder, and heavy rain. So all you have to do to see global warming is look out your window. That's what the Associated Press said yesterday. You can see it from your living room.
Let me ask you this question. You still with me?
Yeah, hold on. Yes, go ahead.
All right. California has the nation's largest desalination plants. They won't turn them on. Why? Is it the environmentalists?
That's a good question. Governor Jerry Brown is is one of the wackiest governors we could have. I don't know his exact reason for not doing that, but what you mentioned earlier, in that whole concept, imagine how plentiful ocean water is. If we could make that to a drinkable, usable water, crops, everything else, we would have one of our, there are real environmental problems, but global warming has hijacked those problems. It actually features scientists talking about how you can't deal with at least regional species problems where you've had overdevelopment in areas and certain species could be threatened. It's hard to deal with it when all the money's being sucked up by the climate change industry, and then wacky regulations, things that could actually help the environment, aren't becoming reality.
Well, and you know what's kind of fascinating is now, because we have a fairly sizable agricultural industry here in the United States. I mean, we're getting kind of off the topic here, but maybe not. We have got foreign governments, China and Saudi Arabia, that are coming in and buying our farms, our farm operations. And what are they doing? They're using our farm operations, our water, our technology to grow wheat and corn and whatever the heck else. And then where does that go? It goes right back over, to some other foreign country. And it's not like we get to keep the revenue because they bought the operation. So we're not helping the farmers here either. And it's because of water.
It was water. And also, there's instances where they were shutting down coal plants during the Obama administration, and people like George Soros and groups he was affiliated with were buying them up. And this is a way they'll buy up this stuff. They regulate something, they could go bankrupt, then they buy it up. And then at some point they may favor less restrictions, or maybe they foresaw the rise of Trump, but then they're going to be benefiting off it, people who are allegedly opposed. And it's very similar to, as you mentioned, foreigners coming in and buying this farmland. So, we have in America the energy ability to be the world leader, and we're actually already there on all key respects. We're the Saudi Arabia of coal. We've got fracking now to fight with OPEC. We just need to continue to unleash this, and we can do that. The problem came when we were under oppressive regulations of the previous administration. That's where you get into these problems where you start bankrupting, things going nuts, and you get opportunities for foreign companies to come in and exploit that.
Well, all right. So the New York Times comes out with an article that the Antarctica, it's over with. It's gone. Greenland's, it's going to be toast too. So we have these ridiculous predictions, and they're not even talking about cycling. I mean, this year is hotter than last year, or this, more snow, blah, blah, blah. I mean, weather cycles itself. I mean, that's not even the right term. I mean, weather does what weather does. How in the world are we supposed to control the moon and the sun and the wind and the rain and all these other kinds of things? Is there some technology that was introduced at the Trans-Pacific Partnership or the climate change initiatives or the Barack Obamas or the scientists? Where's this technology that we're going to save ourselves so they, we can keep penguins and polar bears on the Antarctica?
Well, first of all, you mentioned Antarctica. The New York Times article, it was all over the media. Let me just read you an excerpt. The ice in Antarctica will break up, letting loose the waters over two hemispheres, completely flooding the low-lying lands of Europe, Asia, and North America. That was not the New York Times, Denise. That was 1901, the article from the Queen Bay Age in Australia. Here's another one. Mountain after mountain of Antarctic ice will fall into sea, swept northwards by the current, bringing about a much more rapid race, threatening inundation of the land by the rising of the sea. 1922, the Mail Adelaide in Australia. Here's another one. Boats will be able to be launched from the bottom of the steps of the Capitol. Antarctic ice could cause widespread floods. That was the New York Times, 1979. In 1990, they warned that Antarctic ice, you'll be able to tie your boat to the Washington Monument. This scare has had over a century of nonsense. They've always looked at the Antarctica and said, oh my gosh, if this melts, we're all going to die. So how the New York Times gets away with this latest article, they got an article that looked about a decade of data. They didn't even have the data, as I just said. They looked at climate models estimating how much ice there might be in an area. It gives them a huge fudge factor. And then they said, oh my gosh, we're losing ice over the last 10 years. And then they extrapolated some rate 100 years into the future, and they come up with all these scary scenarios. There's so many problems with it, but the first problem is there's an alternative study from NASA, and researchers at NASA are saying, nope, not accurate. This is not happening. Antarctica is contributing to sea level lowering. As a whole, it's gaining ice. The New York Times is focusing on one small part that's melting, and the rest of it is gaining ice, offsetting that melt. So it's just nonsense, but the same rhetoric. And I go back to 1901 in the book, and I go in detail of what they claimed back then, and nothing has changed. They're just fear-mongering. It's just like saying you shouldn't go on that car ride because you're going to die in a crash. It's the same way where they're doing it over and over, same rhetoric, same land masses. They do the same thing with Greenland. They've done the same thing with the Arctic. They do the same thing with polar bears. They just hype models of 50 to 100 years in the future. And why? Because current reality is failing to alarm, so they got to make scarier and scarier predictions and then say, oh, it's worse than we thought because our predictions are much worse than they were 5 years ago.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got Marc Marano here, who's the author of The Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change. Did I miss the memo, Marc, where the volcano in the mainland or main island of Hawaii has been blamed for climate change? I don't think I've seen that one yet.
Yes, there's more. It's belching out all these emissions. No one's putting a volcano tax on. Number one. Number two, since you mentioned, they may as well. Number two, since you mentioned volcanoes, West Antarctica, where it is melting, in the smaller part of Antarctica, there are, I think there's hundreds of undersea volcanoes. And they're not even sure the impact, but it stands to reason that the area has a rapid melt in certain parts because of these volcanoes. But the media and the scientists try to downplay volcanoes as having any impact, either through their emissions or through the heat underneath the ice. So, it goes back to the whole ClimateGate scandal, and I have a whole chapter on this in the book. The media, in collusion with the UN scientists, will craft a narrative, and any bit of data or scientists that don't support their predetermined narrative, it's like a campaign cause. Literally, you're running a campaign. You have a message you want to get out. You don't want to get off message. You don't want protesters. You don't want it to be challenged to get off it. So you suppress it. And that's what they do with global warming. If something's not convenient, they don't mention it. They're never going to mention Hawaii's volcano in the context of what impact it could have. Mount Pinatubo's eruption in 1991 in South America caused a global cooling for several years because it essentially dimmed out the sun from all the aerosol emissions from the volcano. So they're not going to even bring this kind of stuff up. But it's interesting how nature is allowed. It's kind of like the animal rights movement. Animals are allowed to eat. I've never understood this. Animals are allowed to eat other animals. They're not trying to stop snakes from eating mice. They're not trying to stop lions from eating smaller mammals. There's no movement. There's no animal rights movement for that. And that's where a lot of animals are getting consumed. But suddenly humans try to eat an animal, and my God, we're immoral. It's outrageous. Animals shouldn't be eaten. We should be vegans. We shouldn't be doing that. We should have respect animal rights. But then they'll say,
are you suggesting a python tax?
No. Python tax. Well, then they suggest that we're the same. That in other words, we're equal to animals, that we shouldn't consider ourselves superior. So here's a question. If humans aren't superior to animals, why are we being held to a different standard? Why aren't we allowed to eat animals? Why do we have to be vegan? Why are animals allowed to eat animals, but we're not, if we're the same as animals? Even the animal rights people are tacitly acknowledging that humans are superior because they're claiming we have the ability to reason and think, and we shouldn't eat other animals because it's immoral, but yet they don't stop other animals. I don't see a whole, I'm sure there is. Actually, I have heard about the vegan dog movement where people don't want to feed their dogs meat as part of this, but they're not doing anything about animals in the wild, and that's for sure. And the same thing is they're not doing anything about volcanoes. They're not doing anything about oceans. Oceans emit huge amounts of carbon dioxide, and this is just, they're not doing anything about the sun. Right now, actually, we're in solar sunspots are dwindling to levels not seen in centuries, and that's worrying many people. Many scientists are now hoping that the UN and Al Gore are right about carbon dioxide. In fact, Bill Nye has actually said carbon dioxide, our emissions, may have prevented the next ice age. To which I say, what's the problem with global warming? If you're right, if it is that powerful of a warming agent, then we prevented the next ice age, according to a lot of the climate activists. Isn't that a good thing?
Well, it's kind of fascinating now that we have Trump in the White House. Nobody's talking really about. I mean, I don't hear countries, and I listen to these congressional hearings, and nobody's talking about the doomsday clock and how, we're all going to, vaporize by, Thanksgiving because of global warming. Isn't it fascinating that a lot of that has necessarily left the headlines except for the New York Times?
It has. What they've focused on now is just how outrageous that we have people in power who don't accept the UN. One of the biggest stories was how Trump, and this was beautiful, at the G7 summit in Canada, he walked out of the climate right before the climate portion started. And it was a nonsensical thing. It was all about commitments to the UN Paris Agreement, blah, blah, blah. Trump didn't think it was important and just left. And it just caused the media to tie themselves in knots. Here we have this planet killer, leaves the meeting, doesn't want to talk to the other world leaders. It is just awesome to see. Awesome to see.
Well, we're developing a space force, so, maybe the New York Times needs to, see if they can buy any real estate on Mars here, and then they won't have this problem, right?
That's right. They're now saying Mars might be habitable. We could actually move there. So I like to say there is a planet B. For years, we've always had the environmentalists say there is no planet B. Yes, there is Mars. Go set up colonies. But they'll probably immediately enact, if they find life on Mars, they'll probably immediately say you can't develop because they're endangered species. They're only on Mars. I mean, they're gonna come after us. It's all about control, and that's ultimately what my book says. It's not about the science. It's not about concern for the Earth. This is very simply about the latest plug-and-play issue that they're putting into their worldview, which they're very blunt. In the book, I go through how they actually say capitalism and the climate can't coexist, that capitalism is not compatible with a livable climate. So therefore, we need system change in addition to climate change.
Marc, with each of these headlines that, kind of are sitting on, section E of the newspaper and the headlines, and you read them, do you just beat your head against the wall every day?
Well, no, because I think what's happened in the last, particularly 10 years, there's so many other outlets now that it doesn't really matter what CNN or what the New York Times reports. They just don't have any impact anymore. They're preaching to their choir, and everyone else, whether it's on Facebook, Twitter, websites, talk radio, shows like yours, the Drudge Report, they're getting their news from other sources. So it really doesn't matter anymore. 20 years ago, it mattered greatly what the New York Times reported, what the Associated Press. Now I try to look at it as more it's entertainment. It still has a very low-level impact. The biggest impact this nonsense has is on children. And that's what I have a whole chapter in the book on kids, kindergarten through college. They are being indoctrinated. The surveys show that they are the biggest believers. We have a conservative group, college group called Collegians for a Constructive Tomorrow. It's a division of who I work for, a committee for Constructive Tomorrow. And just the last 5 to 7 years, we've noticed that even conservative college kids have been intimidated into silence and standing up on environmental issues because they don't want to be seen as ungreen, or they've bought into the global warming hype because it's all they've ever been told.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking with Marc Marano. Grab his book, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change. Come back because you're a whole bunch of fun to talk to, and thanks for your time, Marc.
Thank you, Denise. Appreciate it. Thanks.
All right.
You are about to join Don Newen, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio, and Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience, for a weekly situation report, or SITREP. 18 hours a day, Denise Simon lives her life as an intel analyst. 18 hours a day, Don Newen lives his life in the world of rock and roll. 1 hour each day, Newen receives a daily SITREP from Simon. Welcome to the Drive Time Situation Report. Fasten your seatbelt. You're now in Don Newen's car, and he is calling in for his SITREP.
Check the Talk America Radio schedules for showtimes at talkamericaradio.us.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio. For 28 years, I was in the mainstream media, most recently as an anchor at the Fox News Channel. No more. Ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has completely failed the American people. Radio networks like Talk America Radio will not fail you. Radio shows like Cowboy Logic Radio will not fail you. Check out the entire roster of over 60 weekly radio shows by visiting talkamericaradio.us. That's talkamericaradio.us.
TalkAmericaRadio.us.
Can we do it again? I like it.
Ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Went all the way across the pond here to see if we couldn't reach out to the UK. We need some friends here in America, and whatever happens in the UK seems to start happening over here a little bit later. So I'm delighted to have David Clews with us. Now, David is the founding director of UK Unity, and they can be found on Facebook, and they can be found on Twitter. And David has been kind enough to join us because we see some snippets of videos, especially after the Tommy Robinson thing, and we often wonder what is really happening over there, because media in the UK actually is worse than it is here in the United States. Imagine that. So, David, thanks so much for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience.
My pleasure, Denise, and thanks very much for asking me to come on. Always delighted to speak to our cousins across the pond.
David, we've seen a couple of, groups that have launched themselves or launched some movements in the UK trying to, fight back against an insurgency that you've got going over there. And they kind of come and go. Yep. The leaders kind of come and go. And I think a lot of it is because the government is throwing sand in the gears. They refuse to listen. And in the meantime, we're over here, watching all of this, just kind of wondering what in the hell is happening over there in the UK.
Well, the first thing is quite interesting is you and I were talking earlier, and you say that the UK is 10 years ahead of America. We always think we're 10 years behind America.
Well, it depends upon what it is.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, what's really interesting is I set up this organisation first and foremost to ensure that the vote to leave the European Union is honoured, because unless the UK leaves the European Union, we can't change anything. As part of the European Union, we're totally tied to all of their laws, all of their human rights, everything. You can't control your own borders when you're part of the European Union.
Correct.
So, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about that, about the immigration side of things. So, just, this was the big reason people voted for Brexit, to leave the EU. A migrant could come and land in Greece, and they would have as much of a right to come and live in Britain and get our benefits if they got citizenship over there.
That's the also it's necessarily part of the Schengen agreement too, correct?
Correct. Although Britain isn't actually part of Schengen, but we have had an incredible influx of people from Central to Eastern Europe, most of which has been good. We've always had good relationships with Poland and other countries, but then we've had a lot of people as well from other areas. And then, of course, you've had the migrant crisis in the last 2 to 3 years. So, immigration has changed the face of the United Kingdom beyond recognition. There's parts of England now there isn't any British people living in them. It's crazy.
David, I would think that every single Brit, every single Scot, every single, Irishman would be absolutely outraged. I mean, it's almost as though you don't need to have, these political action groups, and they're not even political action groups. They're I would say they're sovereign groups that are trying to save some kind of sovereignty of your nations and your history. It is remarkable that Parliament and the EU has such power over the people, and we're seeing a lot of it here. I mean, we're fighting back against our government in a lot of ways, but our problems dwarf yours.
Yeah, I mean, correct, because in America there is still that local change. There is a genuine grassroots movement in America. The idea of grassroots movements for change, people don't even understand that concept yet in the UK. It's literally only just starting. Whether you like it or not. I mean, Obama got in on grassroots. As much as I wasn't happy about that, the Tea Party. America's got, and then you've got all your super PACs that you mentioned as well. In Britain, that we hardly have any of that.
And so if you do, you get thrown in jail.
Well, correct. Let's go on to Tommy Robinson, because I know that's a huge story. What do you want to know about the Tommy Robinson situation?
Well, first of all, we have seen some of these rallies, and I don't want to call them protests, because I don't think you're not protesting certain things, but you're necessarily protesting the fact that he was out there on the street. I watched that video live when it happened. The guy wasn't doing anything wrong. In fact, he was actually talking to some police until somebody else got the order to go grab him.
Yeah.
First of all, is he safe today where he is in detention?
Well, that's the $1 million question, and nobody really knows. He was in solitary confinement, but we now know that he's been moved out of solitary confinement onto the main prison wing. But he's in his own cell for 23 and a half hours a day. He doesn't get out of his cell. Now, in these prisons, I mean, I know the American penal system has got gangs and everything like that as well. In the UK prison system, there is a lot of Islamic extremists. Yep. And these guys there's been what's called a fatwa, which is a religious order put out to try and kill Tommy in prison. And, all it takes is one nut job or one extremist, and that's him gone. And Tommy himself said that by putting him in prison, it's a death sentence.
How long is he going to be there, do you know?
Well, he's been sentenced to 13 months. His legal team are starting to appeal that. We do have slightly different laws from in the US. We disagree with that, but we don't value free speech as much as you guys do. What he was arrested for was reporting on a criminal case.
Correct.
And what the judge said was that by him doing that, it could have caused the case to collapse.
He wasn't even inside the courtroom.
No, he wasn't. That's the whole point. So basically what has happened here is the authorities, the police and the establishment don't like Tommy Robinson. They don't like what he stands for, and they've found something on him to put him in prison.
We also have the same situation with Britain First and Paul Golding and Jada, correct?
Correct, yes, correct. Now, some of Britain First stuff is not necessarily my cup of tea. They're not everybody's cup of tea. You know, they are, but I think the way in which they were jailed and the manner in which they were jailed was again totally unfair. And you know, it's even if I disagree with someone, I would fight for their right to say it.
So, free speech over there is over with.
To an extent, yes, it is. It is, yes. If you were to say, I mean, I don't believe you should be allowed to incite violence. You know,
right.
Like I can't go out in the street and say, right, let's go and beat this guy up because he's I don't like how he looks. You know, but if you're just talking about Islam or a religion or a way of life in the UK, if the government decides they don't like what you're saying, then they'll come knocking at your door.
You also have beyond Islam and the Islamists that have, you know, created all these regions or areas or cells within the UK that, you know, Brits don't even go into anymore.
Correct.
You also have another whole influx of foreigners, and I would say you've got a major component of corrupt Russians there too, correct?
Yes, I wouldn't disagree. An interesting statistic is the Conservative Party, who's run by Theresa May, take huge donations from Russians in London. And the whole system stinks in the UK. I mean, to quote your president, we need to drain the swamp.
How do you do that?
Well, it's really tough. I'm afraid I think it has to be done through people power. What you've got is you've got a toxic mix in London. The problem is it's all centred down in London, where you've got rich Russians, rich Arabs, rich Chinese. They all come, they buy up all the properties.
Yep.
You know, they mingle with power. It's totally corrupt.
We have some of that there, but or here, but I don't think it's as bad as it is over there. And we're trying to wade through some of this because you know, we get the BBC channel over here in America, and you know, every once in a while I'll run over there and turn it on and see what they're reporting, and they're just not telling anything, are they?
No. One of the problems with Britain is we're too polite. You know, British people are very polite. We're not like you guys. We don't just say it how we think.
But then again, if you're so polite, that you know, there's politeness, but that doesn't mean you can't report something.
Well, that's the BBC is a highly liberal organisation. The BBC pushes an agenda of open borders, pro-European, don't say anything to offend anybody. But the reality is people's eyes are now getting open to it, Denise. It really is. It's like in America, you know, you've got your show. You guys do a great job. You've got a huge alternative media in America. We hardly have that in the UK.
You have any bloggers?
Well, yeah, we do, but it's only really starting to grow and take off now. You know, as I said, our campaign set up our own news site, unitynewsnetwork.co.uk, and the response has been great. You know, Tommy was a journalist for the last year and a half, but it's only just starting in the UK to question the government, to question authority, to question the establishment.
Do you guys have any? I mean, do the British citizens have any kind of voice in order to challenge law or to challenge certain members of parliament to change a law, or do you just have to, you know, is it bigger than you because it's really a European Union law?
There's That's why people voted to leave the European Union. That was our popular uprising in the UK. That's when 17.5 million people said, look, enough is enough, we want out. Now, so the problem was, for so many years, the EU was above British law. So what we're saying is we need to put British law first again. But then the problem is our political system is it doesn't elect good politicians. You know, we don't have, I know you guys in America have recall systems.
Some places, yeah.
For some places, I mean, we don't have anything like that. And what you've just got is these faceless, bureaucratic politicians who are just, you know, career politicians. They don't care. You know, it would be like having a room full of 600 Nancy Pelosi's.
And it's a pathetic situation that you guys even know who she is.
Well, I know who Nancy Pelosi. I like my American politics. I know who Nancy Pelosi is. Yeah, she's
Well, then I'm glad she knows that at least she's got an international reputation.
See, your liberals in America, they would be regarded as right wingers in the United Kingdom.
Where are you on the Brexit? I mean, what's the status? I mean, is because now I'm seeing indications that Brexit may not even happen. Is there some truth to that?
It is an absolute farce. You know, one of the reasons I set up this organisation was to campaign. You know, we've been out on the streets, we've been outside Parliament. There's a big, huge march taking place tomorrow in London as well. Basically, the politicians think they know better, and they'll decide what Brexit looks like, not the voters. It is a farce, Denise. It's an absolute farce. We will probably leave the European Union, but it will be in name only. It won't be done properly.
Yeah, I have a feeling that was the truth that was going to come out.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the timetable. Was there some kind of timetable that this was officially to happen?
Well, we're supposed to leave in March 2019, but there's no deals in place yet. The British Parliament is... You see, what happened was the government should have been allowed to just okay it, but a legal challenge was launched, and it meant that the UK Parliament, so everybody had to start voting on it. And then Theresa May, the Prime Minister, called an election, and she lost lots of seats, and it's all just a bit of a farce, to be honest with you.
So you really have a high, you know, your Parliament is our Congress.
Yes, correct.
And you know, we essentially have a two-party system over here, but over there, you know, you got multiple parties going on, right? So you got a hybrid Parliament.
It's interesting, though. I think we're going to head back to a very much a two-party system. More people are voting either Labour or Conservative, but the problem is people maybe like the Conservatives because they're patriotic, they want to cut immigration, but then they don't like them for other things like their economic policies, so people maybe like Labour's economic policies, but they don't like their patriotic policies, so everything's in a bit of a mess just now.
Where are you? Go ahead.
Sorry, on you go.
I'm going to ask, where is Ireland and Scotland and Wales and all of this?
Well, I mean, I'm from Scotland, so the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is voting to leave the EU, and so during that referendum, people in Scotland voted to remain, people in Northern Ireland voted to remain, but we voted as one United Kingdom. So to give you an example, it would be like, well, when Donald Trump won as president, you know, California didn't vote for him, New York didn't vote for him, but he's still the president of the USA. But there's talk in Scotland. I mean, I'm against Scottish independence because everything here is a total mess. Nicola Sturgeon, who's the First Minister of Scotland, wants to leave the United Kingdom and for an independent Scotland to rejoin the European Union.
You have a rally or a march on tomorrow, right?
Correct, yes.
Can you guys gather to do these rallies or these marches, what's the procedure? Do you have to get some kind of a permit? Does it have to be some kind of,
you get permission from the police to hold a march where you're actually on the streets and you're where the cars are? You get police permission, yeah.
Okay, and then are there restrictions on what you can and can't do?
Yeah, but I mean, I think in terms of stuff like that, it's you're reasonably free. But I mean, we do have the right to assemble in the UK. That's not so bad. We're still getting out to protest, but the problem is getting out in the streets and marching helps, but it doesn't actually change anything.
Right.
So the political class are okay to let people out marching on the streets, but they just don't listen to you.
David, can you get on any kind of TV network over there and have a challenge to Theresa May or any members of your parliament to a formal televised debate?
The mainstream media in the UK is very closed off. So if I mean, would I get on? I mean, I've been on occasionally, but they want to have their own people on it. That's why we need alternative media sources in the UK now, because mainstream media is it's like what you've got in America, CNN, MSNBC. People are just sick of them. They're sick of the fake news and the bias.
Oh, it's pretty biased.
I mean, I've got nothing against biased news as long as people admit to it. That's the problem. Is CNN try and say they're impartial, like the BBC says they don't take bias, which is garbage.
So, could you possibly get airtime on BBC?
Maybe. It just depends. It's where the battles are being fought now for patriots and people that want to change is on social media, Facebook, Twitter. Social media is where it's at now. The whole Free Tommy stuff is all on social media. If it wasn't for social media, it wouldn't have been anywhere.
Right. Are any of you guys over there doing some real investigative reporting so you can expose some of the corruption that is happening about the foreign money that's coming in and
there is, but it's tough. It's tough. It's trying to get people to speak. There was a story yesterday about a hospital where 450 old people died because they were being given opiate drugs.
Oh, stop it.
It took 20 years for the inquiry to take place and for the facts to be presented.
All right, what do you need me? What do you need Americans to do? I mean, do we need to partner with you guys over there in order to help report some of these things if you guys can't report them, or help investigate? I mean, there are investigative journalist operations like 2 years ago, I guess it was, that reported with the Panama Papers.
Yep.
I haven't.
What I say about America is Britain and America are totally different countries, but we've still got so much in common.
Yep.
And I would say in all the world, there's no other nation that Britain has more in common with than America. We fought in 2 world wars together. We're the closest of allies. And what we need is Americans just to speak out, and a lot of people, especially with the big thing just now in Britain is getting Tommy Robinson out of prison. I could tell you a million problems that need solved just now, Denise, but we need to get Tommy out, and so pressure needs to come from the US government. I mean, I have seen, is it Representative Gosar, who's a Republican, has raised it in Congress.
Well, the big topic over here in the United States is applying for asylum.
That's right.
Maybe Tommy Robinson ought to apply for asylum in the United States. He would meet the standard because he's a political prisoner.
Yes, he is. I mean, it's interesting. We've watched this debate on immigration as well, and a lot of the news coverage is. I mean, I'm not a Republican or Trump supporter. I agree with a lot of what Trump does. I disagree with it as well. I'm quite a middle-of-the-road kind of guy. But the way in which the story was reported was disgusting, because these kids weren't being crying in their sleep and being separated. It was lies that were being put out. You know, and the fact of the matter is, these parents have been using these children to get, you know, to get asylum in in America, and that's wrong.
Yeah,
You know?
and I keep going back to the failed states. These, you know, these countries, the Honduras's and the Guatemalas and, you know, El Salvador's, they're failed states. And you really have the same thing, because, I mean, you got the influx of, you know, North Africa and Syria. They're failed states.
It is exactly the same what is going on in America as it is in the UK. Yet the people that leave Libya, North Africa, will travel thousands of miles to get to the UK.
Same thing.
It is exactly the same thing. And then the liberal media, open borders, your George Soroses of this world will fight a propaganda campaign that, oh, we're these big bad people because we're doing this, when you're just enforcing the law.
Well, we do have. Look, David. Here's the deal. I want to stay very, very close. You know, to, you know, the connective tissue that we can have between our two countries. So Denise and David here. Because I mutually we need some help, and mutually we need to be doing the same thing for the same reasons. We have a little bit more leeway than you do.
Correct. It is a matter of what I call it is culture wars. You know, our British way of life, like American way of life, it's under attack from globalist forces, and, you know, people are trying to change the face of the United Kingdom. And you know, America was built on immigration, and Britain's had a lot of good immigration, but that doesn't mean you fundamentally alter the shape and face of your country.
Yeah, you don't replace your population.
No, and that's what's taking place.
Ladies and gentlemen, we need for you to go to ukunity.org.uk.
Please do.
And also on Facebook at what is it? Unity.
Unity.
And where are you on Twitter?
At UKUnity.org. And if you visit unitynewsnetwork.co.uk as well, that's the news site. I'll email you all these links over, Denise. Okay?
Yeah, please. We certainly want to, you know, to help out. Again, we've got some very common causes here, and we need for you to have, you know, not 15,000 registered supporters, but we need you to have, you know, 1.5 million, and I would say within months, not years.
Yep.
Because I don't think you necessarily have years, do you?
Well, I think you know, I think in all of this, you know, what's happened is Tommy Robinson is crucial in all of this. You know, we're growing our grassroots movements, and, you know, a lot of people will unite behind Tommy, but we need him out of prison, because nothing will happen. But it's interesting, you know. Have you been to the UK before, Denise?
I have, but it's been a lot of years, and you didn't have these issues.
No, we don't. And I cannot. All I will say is that the UK is changing. People have had enough. A bit like America, you know. People just turned around and said, "Look, enough is enough. We can't go on like this."
Well, stay in touch, Mr. David Clews, and thanks for being with us. And ladies and gentlemen, we're happy that you could be along for the ride. We'll see you again very, very soon.